Thanks very much for the invitation. It's really nice to meet all of you. We are pretty new to the South Big Data Hub family, I guess. We got this S.E.E.D grant for the first time a year and a half ago. But so it is, I think, I'm glad I went after Dr. Dennis, because I think we're coming at this issue as a pedagogical tool, having done the work. I'm not a teacher of data science, but I use data science in the project that I'm going to talk about. And then we realized that if we are going to need students and future staff for the project, we need to teach what we've learned over the last 15 years and create a curriculum to do the work. And I will say, the discussion, data, people think of as just a bunch of numbers, but these are people's lives, right? These are real human stories literally behind every single data point. And this is kind of the approach that we take with all of our data, because it is about action. It is about empowerment. It is about taking that knowledge that you gain from the data and using data science skills in order to do something, right? It is about analysis, but it's also about action. And that's, I think, what most of our students are concerned about, and most of the people that come to our data for. So I want to talk a little bit before I get into the actual S.E.E.D grant as to why we even came into this work. I oversee a project called the Baltimore Neighborhood Indicators Alliance, and this was a project that was created in 1999 in different cities around the country through foundation grants, sorry. So the Annie E. Casey Foundation was the biggest one. There was other foundations around the country that were trying to get data, newly electronic data coming out of government. E-government was relatively new in the 1990s, and GIS, computing power, was also relatively new in the ubiquitousness of it by the time the 1990s comes around. And so looking at spatial data that's being generated by all of these e-government platforms, and then the computing power with GIS. So just by way of background, I'm an urban planner. I happen to have a quantitative background. My undergraduate degree is in mathematics, but as an urban planner, it's always about taking data to understand the current situation and using it to plan for the future, whatever scale we're talking about. And I normally work in urban areas, but this could apply to any local jurisdiction. And then, of course, within an urban area, I'm going to be talking about neighborhoods. And neighborhoods are essentially a system, an organism and system that has everything happening to it, right? Education, crime, housing, health, everything is happening in that unit of analysis, which is essentially a neighborhood, and it operates like a system. And so what we're after is creating what are called community-based indicators to help people understand, analogously kind of the physiology of a body. We're trying to get at the ecometrics of a place. And so that's the goal of all of our projects. There are now 30 cities around the country that are part of the National Neighborhood Indicators Partnership. We were the 6th member at the time, but you can see kind of the gamut of cities around the country that have the similar approach. We're pulling out what are called administrative data sets from governments at all scales, local, state, federal, augmenting that with some proprietary data, obviously census data, and then pushing it back out for the communities to use. So this is what we do every year. We issue the Vital Signs Report, which is a compendium of over 100 different indicators across these different topics. Again, thinking of a neighborhood as a system. So every neighborhood gets a battery of indicators, over 110 indicators every year. And so you can see trends. What's the crime rate over the last 20 years? What's the number of children that are in the school system over the last 20 years? What's the median sales price, median income, whatever you want to know in a comprehensive fashion about any particular neighborhood. But so you can imagine we have 20 years, 110 different indicators, and we've broken up the city into what are called 55 communities. So, do the math of how many data points that is. And so we needed kind of a lot of work to process the data that we've kind of figured out over the years. How do we, how do we write scripts so that we're cleaning data in a way that isn't so manual, right? How do we use APIs to grab data so we're not constantly doing a download? All of these things we had to figure out as technology has been changing over the last 20 years, and with different kinds of skills that we bring to the table. Like, not everybody is a computer scientist. Most of us have a technical background, but not necessarily computing skills. So we have all of this data, and we've learned a lot and figured out a lot, and we've wanted to figure out how do we actually create basically an onboarding process, right? If you want to bring anybody into our project, it's a little bit of a nightmare for new staff because we don't really have standard operating procedures because things change all the time. So these are the kinds of people over the years as a manager that I've had to bring on board to the project. Because if you can imagine, it's data acquisition, data processing, data analysis, and then that communication piece, which sometimes our data scientists don't know how to do the communication piece, but you need some way to kind of pass the baton across. So this is literally all of the kind of different skills sets that we have on staff throughout the years. And you can see data scientist is not necessarily one of the things that we do, but it's kind of everything that we do. And so in 2019, 2020, we were awarded a HDR grant from the NSF, which some of you might have, really thinking about how do we create a curriculum to help people understand what we do across any interdisciplinary field. And so we have a HDR grant with UMBC here in the Baltimore region, Towson State. UMBC is University of Maryland, Baltimore County. I'm at the University of Baltimore, Towson State, and Bowie State, and we are all part of the University of Maryland system of schools. So we have that kind of shared ability to work together and create co-curriculum. And we wanted to create a way for a standardized way across all of our skill sets to help students understand how to use their skills for social good. Again, the actionability part of the equation. And for me, it's how do I create a set of people that can come in and actually start working for me? So it was a little bit self-serving, I guess, in that way. And it literally worked. One of the Towson, each one of our institutions every year chooses 5 students to be a part of the data core, and we have a joint curriculum across all 4 of our institutions with those 20 students. And I just hired one from Towson University to join our group. So it's working. That's a good thing. And so the way that the project works, and I can put this in the chat, this link in the chat when I'm done with the screen share, but the way it works is that we get nonprofits as part of the project. We get nonprofits or governmental agencies that have a problem, and then we use our data science skills and we assign them to that problem and actually help them work through the issue. And so in data science, what we've told them that data science is a set of tools. The problem is fixed, or the problem might change over time. But to answer that problem, you're going to need to kind of dip into your toolbox to figure out how to actually answer that question. And that's what we're here to help you, because that's what our project has been all about. It's never one particular tool. It's a suite of tools that we have to figure out what to use in any different context. We obviously are a pretty high GIS shop because all of our data has to have some spatial aspect to it. And we do not have a GIS degree at the University of Baltimore. There's a GIS degree at Towson and a GIS degree at UMBC. And so we are trying to teach our data science students who are learning, in the information science and applied information technology field. We're kind of augmenting what they're learning in the classroom, which is Python, data cleaning, that kind of thing, and adding in a GIS kind of component to their skill set. They don't generally have too much by way of statistical background, and we're not really an R shop yet. We're probably going to eventually need to move there. And the university is an SPSS licensed location, so we do teach them SPSS for now. And then we walk through, the full data science process with our students. What is the question that you're trying to ask, right? And sometimes, our data with the vital signs data, we have a question that we want to ask. Sometimes the nonprofits that we're working on, or the city that we're working on, the city partner that we're working with has a project. And then you have to figure out, okay, if this is a question that I want to try to answer, what is the data that I'm going to use to try and answer that? And like I said, we focus in on that administrative data set, but we obviously talk about other kinds of data that might be out there. Focusing on data processing, making sure that you're looking at the data, making sure that one data set matches another data set, making sure that you can actually do the analysis and set up the data in the proper way. And then think about what kind of analysis you actually want to do. Is it a GIS-based analysis? Is it some other statistical kind of analysis? And then we kind of force our students to work on the communication, the so what. And not just so what from a policy point of view, but what did you learn through the process? What skill did you have to pick up in order to do this work? Like, one of our students had never accessed an API before, so she literally wrote the code and put in a blog, here's how I went and got an API call in order for me to do the coding that I needed to do. And that, little bit of information is really important for the next student that comes on, because they're going to know that they need these very specific things in order to do the analysis. So the communications is a little bit about, what do you want the next student to know based on what you learned through the process. And so now we have 2 years worth of these kind of blogs that the students have put together, and that's being used. So like I mentioned, they're working and in some cases creating data. They're creating data that's been cleaned, right? It's gone through that process, it's been processed. And we didn't want to lose that data because it's kind of valuable data. They've only analyzed it for one particular question, right? But now that the data has been cleaned, it could be used for all kinds of different things, maybe either with that organization or with somebody else. And in most cases, by the time it's been processed, it's been aggregated, or it's certainly been de-identified if there was any identification on there to begin with. So it's actually clean, good data for other students to use. And so we wanted to create a way for them to host their data once so at the end of their project, not only communicate, but also host their data. Some of our students, for example, have created scripts that you can pull data out of the open data portal, and you can kind of routinely run the script and keep adding to an open data portal. And so we wanted to come up with, which portal are we going to use? We've got 4 different institutions with 20 different students. No, we're not going to have a manager of publishing data, so we have to distribute how that publishing occurs. What do we have access to in terms of platforms? How much would it cost? And really think deeply about how we're going to set up an open data portal for the Baltimore Data Science Core, so that other students in the region can use what they've done. So basically kind of moving forward and creating a resource well beyond the 20 students that we get every year. And so that was what we used the SEED funding for, to create a series of webinars that all of you now have access to. The webinars are amazing. We asked kind of people what kind of platforms people wanted to use or think about or learn more about in terms of open data platform technology. And then how can we get our data science to publish onto the platform. And these are the kinds of questions that people had if they're thinking about creating an open data portal, which I think you all probably have too. You can see, how do you create visualizations? How do you stop bots with the security, privacy? How do you create metadata? How do you upkeep? And how do you engage other civic tech organizations? So I'll put the link to the webinars in the chat too, but we did 3 different, we did Hub Zero, we did CCAN, and we did Esri Online, or the Esri Data Portal Hub. And for each one of our sessions, we asked each one of our respondents or speakers to try to answer as many of these questions as possible. How do you handle multiple publishers? What's the process for metadata and documentation? How do you archive when something is like old? How do you customize a platform? How do you integrate for data visualization? And what are the maintenance costs? So if you are thinking about doing any one of these or just look at all of them, they're actually just all amazing webinars to review. And so we are now in the process of creating the open data portal for students to post to this summer. And we create an event every July called Baltimore Data Week, which is open to the public. And that's where we're going to have a kind of a reveal of the data science students data portal so that other people can use it in the fall and beyond. So I will stop there. Thanks so much for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think that we're really excited about your program in general, and this resource as part of the reason was we thought it could be very useful to others as they go through a similar process of trying to look at open portals and other things. So are there any questions from the group? And then I'll have a question too. I got lots of hands. Okay, so Catherine, you want to go first?
Sure. Thank you so much. Super interesting. So are you?
Introduce yourself.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm Catherine Kramer, and I know Renata from when I was working on Data Science for All with the Northeast Big Data Hub. We actually got a S.E.E.D. grant from them on to work on expanding a data jam project out of the University of Pittsburgh. I can talk about that later, but that's been super exciting. But I'm also now working with the West Hub. I work remotely with the Supercomputer Center at UCSD. I guess my question, are you still accepting projects for nonprofits that need help?
Oh yeah, we do every semester. We have a call out for nonprofit. Obviously, they have to relate to Baltimore.
Okay, so
that was the HDR is about. The HDR is how do you groom a data science core to actually help cities like Baltimore. So all of our questions come from Baltimore.
Okay, so an organization in Massachusetts called Amplify POC, which is about supporting Black-owned businesses. They are really, I'm actually just putting out a call to everybody. If anybody knows anybody in Massachusetts I've been trying to find either a group of students or a project like yours that could help them sort of get more data literate. And they're based in Massachusetts. So if anybody has any thoughts.
I think Amherst has a good, and I would maybe look at all of the recipients of the HDR NSF grant.
Smith might also have something.
Okay.
Shoot Nick Horton an email.
I know Nick. Yes, I will do that. That's a good idea.
Nick will know who in that area is doing stuff if he is not involved in it himself.
Okay, great thought. And then Seema, my other question, I saw library science. Yeah, so what could you say just a little bit about what that work is or how they're involved?
Yeah, so we have to create the 110 indicators every year. It comes from about 50 different sources, and you do that every year. So you just imagine the raw data, it's got to go somewhere every year. And the whole point of the thing is that you can go back and query that data. And so we're effectively a data library for all city data. So we have parcel data, we've got permit data, we've got crime data, we've got so much data. And that's actually about a third of our funding comes from other researchers that need Baltimore data. We're their data partner, and we essentially cut and filter the data for whatever purpose they need. We're not the data science, we're not the subject matter experts for whatever they're doing, but they need to link their data to some kind of spatial data set, looking at context, looking at whatever. And so if that's how your revenue is generated, you got to be really good at finding your data. And so we actually had a civic librarian with us to think about, okay, what does our process need to look at? Version control is so critical for us. If you got the wrong version, you're dead in the water. And if you can't go back and recreate your steps, you're not going to be able to kind of replicate things again. So all that, you can just imagine our repository at this point, 20 years of doing this. And it's not big data, right? It's not like millions of records, but it's lots of little data sets over many, many years. So 50 times 20, and then multiple versions of each data set. So we keep the raw data set as it was. We don't touch it. If we do any modifications to it, then it goes to the next version, and on and on and on. So 50 data sets, 4 different versions, 20 years. We got to be able to find that stuff.
Great, thank you.
That's probably, Uma, did you have your hand up as
Yes.
well?
Yes, thanks, Seema. This sounds like a very interesting project. I'm particularly interested in the open data portal for data science students. So how do you envision that? Would other universities be able to submit data sets? And if we do, I'm assuming this is more than a repository. So you are going to provide some visualizations and things inbuilt. So would we have to provide the code for that, or would it get done through your portal? How does that work?
Realistically, just the logistics of this, it's going to need to be USM, University of Maryland System Schools, just because we're all on the same platform.
Okay.
So even that is a nightmare to try and get multiple schools to submit to the same portal. So it's a federated hub. So each one of the schools still maintains their own hub, but you can see it all in one shot. I have no idea how we would go beyond USM. It was a feat just to even figure this out, to get to all of our schools here in the Maryland region to work together. But maybe that's a model that can work in other states, right?
Yes.
Especially if you have this linkage across universities where you can share platforms. So that's what it's going to look like. But it's an open data portal, so your students can certainly use the data. They might not be publishers to the portal, but they can certainly be users of it.
So would you be publicizing it in this forum once it's up, or should we contact you?
We will come back after July. And happy to write up. I think you guys have your newsletter, right? We can certainly write something for the newsletter to let people know it's up and running.
That would be good. Thank you.
That'd be great. And also we have a
very,
page for this project on the South Hub site. We have a seed grants page for every seed grant. So these types of links and things can also be put there that are, connected to the seed grant. And we'll put the newsletter out, but it's also just a way to send people to you from our portals. So that's the question I had, was Uma's question of if it's open for any academic that might want to use Baltimore data as an example.
Exactly.
Do you have case studies or something that could, or modules almost that could be used in courses? Is that going to be a part of the portal?
Well, that was what I was going to quickly mention. They are case studies because the cases come from real people, right? Or real organizations. So just to give you an example, these are what the data science core just at our university has been working on. There's 4 universities. So, if you are interested in, let me give a good one. We were looking at how many civic tech organizations there are in Maryland. And so this was that one about the API and trying to come up with the meetups in the region. Like, how do you do meetup API access? How do you look for, this was a code for Twitter of how do you look for certain types of behaviors of, no masking. This is before, we had the vaccine. So this code is going to keep scraping Twitter data for that kind of data, and that's going to go up there. We have scooter data, like where people are using scooters in the city of Baltimore. And so these are where the use cases are coming, because the question was coming from some nonprofit organization or the city itself. So some of our students went to the health department, some of our students went to the office of the mayor and the chief data officer, and we're going to keep growing this list. So I think it'll be, questions that students, even if they're not from Baltimore, they might want to know, like, where are people using scooters in a city? Things like that. So they're manageable questions, and the data sets are ready for different kind of analysis, right?
Go ahead. No.
Seema, did I hear you mention the University of Maryland, Baltimore campus?
Baltimore County, yes. UMBC.
Baltimore County, okay.
Yeah, it's very confusing. We have University of Maryland, Baltimore County, which is an undergraduate kind of STEM-based university.
Right.
And then we have University of Maryland, Baltimore, which is a graduate kind of professional,
Right.
social work, law, that kind of thing. And then I'm at the University of Baltimore, which is a non-traditional, both graduate and undergraduate institution that's mostly business and law.
Are you working with the Hilltop Institute at all? University of Maryland, Baltimore?
Not for this project, but in general, yeah, we've worked with Hilltop because they have all the health data.
Yeah, the Medicaid data, okay.
Yeah, and Hilltop is at UMBC. Yep, the
Right.
University of Maryland, Baltimore County. Yep.
Okay.
I had a quick question about your rollout. So you'll have actual curriculum data as part of the portal, but when you work with partners specifically, on these manageable questions that are around like transit or other things like that, will the methods be a part of, how you might have gotten that type of data, like what departments you would go to look at? So if another city, let's say if you're in another city, Atlanta or North Carolina, and you wanted to look at people underserved, I saw one of your projects was underserved by transit.
Yeah,
what
so
what
all of
departments do
those
you go
blogs-
to?
Yeah, all of those blogs, we made those students write everything down. What data are you looking at? What question are you trying to answer? Where did it come from? So that anybody can go back and look at that. But it's a good question on once we put up the data and we have the use cases and we create kind of a pathway for our students to publish as well as write their blogs, which is a very critical component of the final project. It is a good question. Maybe this is my next seed funding request. How do we kind of keep curating the ideas and help other people use the data? So maybe look out for my application.